Thank you very much, Dr. Flaherty, for some very sobering real examples and statistics. Does anybody have any quick questions at this point?
I have a quick question. I'm Joanne Cammons. I'm the Executive Director of AdGene, open source nonprofit repository, for those of you that don't know about it. I guess, I do a lot of career development talks with postdocs and grad students and young faculty around the country, NIH, Michigan, all over the East Coast, and they're petrified at the grant situation. They're petrified, even the ones that want to go into academia, they don't know how to get into industry. And they're mostly petrified. One of the things they're really petrified about is papers. Because that's the product of their graduate work, that's the product of their postdocs. Whereas in industry, their product will be product. While they're in academia, their product is knowledge. And I guess, I see this as a difficult time. I am fully in favor of all these shifts that we're discussing today as the executive director of an open access company. But I'm really, really worried how we're going to make a big enough shift that we don't terrify all of our scientists out of their education.
Yeah, those are great points, and I'll just make my one editorial comment since you're asking it while I'm standing up here. I mean, the first thing I look for in trainees, so postdoctoral fellows, or even earlier, who are looking to be evaluated, if you will, looking for positions, either in my own group or coming out of my institution and looking for advice, is productivity. Productivity over anything else. And it is oftentimes difficult to discern productivity out of a very early investigator who just, we all recognize the amount of time it takes to set up laboratory-based or clinical investigations to just even produce results, much less, sort of be at it long enough to maybe sort of strike in a fruitful direction. You also recognize, of course, that the mentor and the environment that they're in could influence even what projects they're sort of are there for them to potentially pursue, and that's going to influence the luck or lack of luck, but usually doesn't influence productivity, just the generation of results over time. So it's actually, in my way of thinking, it allows me to evaluate people much more readily if I can simply see the body of their activity and worry a lot less about whether that has resulted in huge impact and changing in the direction that the field has gone. I mean, that's wonderful when it happens, but for all of the instances where that doesn't happen in the first 3 years of someone's research career, you'd still like to have a method of being able to evaluate their output. And this is, in my mind, actually one of the solutions that comes from the thinking of being able to put data in the public space at an earlier point, with all due credit to those who produced it, so that actually referees, like I'm describing, we can be in the hiring side can have a look.
Okay, thank you. And one
Hi,
more
Christy Thomas, University of Iowa. So I'm an academic who needs to publish his results in peer-reviewed journals so that my study section at the NIH, for example, is going to look at the papers published and the places where they're published and give it some validity. But I like conceptually the idea of open access and the ability to publish papers in this kind of forum. I'm not ready to move all my science over there. One would not want such a venture to only be a repository for negative results and for quanta of data that is not enough to make a full story but has to go someplace because your postdoc or your graduate student has to leave and you really don't have an interest in completing what he started. And that really isn't what I think the people who are driving this effort want. They want the best science to come to F1000 research or to PLOS One, and I'm not sure focusing on that would get there, but I see that as a clear reason to have something like this. But staying with the clinical trials and negative data and the consequences for medicine, surely not all negative clinical trial data can be published even if it was open access because it's controlled by the pharmaceutical company that perhaps supported the research. And one can get to that point more readily if the FDA were to make the IND database public rather than having to take the trouble of having to publish this. If the real end goal is to advance the cause of medicine for the sake of patients, you don't have to have this sort of convoluted process to get there.
No, I tend to agree. In fact, maybe a couple comments, but it's more of an issue of who analyzes that data, right? So having the raw data available is all well and good, because then we could all go in and do our own analysis. But what fraction of the field is going to do that, to actually sit down with their biostatistician in hand and go through 1,000,005 data points produced in even a small study? And so I think the issue about who does the analysis and dissemination is actually still worthy. You can call that whatever you want, but I still think that's a publication unit, if you will, and however it's disseminated, we can debate and discuss. Going to your point about why not all trials make it out into the public domain, at least in my career span, there's not a single clinical trial agreement that my institution signs on my behalf or that I co-sign that doesn't mandate that we be able to publish that data if we so choose, right? This is the sponsor can decide to have all the enthusiasm or lack of enthusiasm they want, but the ability to publish the data is in the academic, when using academic or partnering with academic institutions to produce those results. I can't speak to a single instance where that's actually the underpinning. I share the conspiracy theory in the back of my mind, but actually isn't really, outside of breach of contract, not really a possibility.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting discussion, and I'm sure we'll continue it a bit later on in the Q&A session as well.